I fell in love with the club, which led me to fall in love with rugby. I didn't even know you could play rugby in the U.S. I had seen it every once in a while on ESPN, and I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what the hell is going on, but this is interesting. I think the advent of the World Cup in 2031 and 2033 will help, but I think initially it has hurt.
What was an aspect that you kept seeing reoccurring, whether subtly or very direct, that made you go like, oh, this might be one of these bottlenecks that might be impacting the development of U.S. rugby?
The problem that America faces when it comes to rugby is so big because America is so big.
I think the minute I stepped on a practice field for rugby, the calling happened.
An 8-year plan to be on the team. And I was in it within 2 years.
Don't wait until you are a pro to be a pro, right?
And I walk around with a rugby ball sometimes and they're like, what is this child on?
It looked like it was heavy. Yeah.
It's up. It's not up.
That's the first time I played like professional.
I'm making rugby money. How can I make money outside of it?
And those two Scottish guys, and I said, "Oh, you're here for the movie."
That rugby is a game for all shapes and sizes, all cultural aspects.
He looked at me and he said, "You guys are awesome."
Grow rugby, 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 let's go to rock.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of Grow Rugby. My name is GiftTime and Bailu, and of course, this is the show where we speak to people about the opportunities that they have found, created, or taken advantage of via rugby. Y'all, this was a wild weekend. Not the greatest weekend for USA Rugby, but it's a great weekend for women's rugby overall. The Rugby World Cup 2021, 2022, Women's Rugby World Cup started this weekend. Some not really great matches, actually, to be perfectly honest with you. The matches weren't great, but it was great rugby that was played. Clear dominance in the top half of the bracket. England, France, New Zealand, Australia, even though they technically lost to New Zealand, just really kind of a wipeout on rugby, but we got to see the power players really show, and it was really what's up. Italy obviously beating USA women, but this was just week number 1. We still got 5 more weeks of this. Next week to reset, we're gonna go again. USA getting number 1. I'm telling you, all right. But it was good to be able to see a Rugby World Cup come back and be able to catch the highlights and some of the games as you were. But in the meantime, we got an amazing guest for you. Yo, this man just wrote an amazing book. This is Rugby. Really interesting book. Loved the context. I got a chance to be able to talk about it myself and be a part of the book. Adam Hughes. Man, I forgot. I didn't even say the name. Adam Hughes is on the podcast. Man, great conversation that we had overall. I'm not even going to lie. Like, between where rugby is, his story, the process of writing the book, like, I couldn't get enough, and I could have had this conversation forever. It's my guy, and I hope you guys get a chance to check it out. It's on Amazon. It is the number 1 book in rugby in the world on Amazon. All right, number 1. Get it right. And even if it's not number 1, it might be number 2. But I'm going to say number 1 because this is what we do over here. We're going to get it to number 1. But great text, great book. I loved it, man. I loved it. On top of that, guys, I don't want you guys to forget, definitely check out the Rugby Outlet Mall. Get your rugby shirts. We got the orders in. We are ready to distribute these things out. And of course, because you guys are listeners on here, you guys get to use our coupon code, promo code, GROW Rugby, GREAUX Rugby. Definitely get 10% off of anything in the store. Rock it out, man, and definitely want to be able to get a chance to do what you got to do with it. And of course, whether it's a Rugby Life, it's a Rugby Pal shirt, get you ready for your Rugby Bay. I mean, it's not February yet, but start getting through, and then we might throw some stuff in for Halloween coming up. So just let it be known, hey, you got something to go to. But in the meantime, guys, I also don't want you to please don't forget to share this with your friends. Subscribe to it on YouTube. Follow and follow the podcast on your platform that you're listening to, so you can get more notifications. Definitely like this on YouTube, like this, or leave a comment on the podcast. I definitely appreciate it, and I know even with the inconsistencies, you guys have been consistently being able to listen, and I appreciate you fully. So in the meantime, I'm not going to hold you guys off any bit longer. Adam Hughes, author, coach, player, and of course, the historian now of American rugby. Check it out.
Grow rugby, 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 grow rugby.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of Grow Rugby. My name is GiftTime available, and of course, we got the incredible I, and of course, the P's of P's, the persons. Yes, the P's of P's going through. Just wrote a book, another big one. I got to be in it, so of course, I'm biased towards it. This is Rugby with Adam Hughes. Adam, man, thank you so much for coming through.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Gift. I really appreciate it. Love talking to you. I've always loved what you're doing and what you continue to do. I'm a big fan, and so I'm really glad to be in here.
Man, I appreciate it, and the feeling is absolutely mutual. Whenever we contacted, this was almost 2-3 months ago.
Yeah,
and you were talking about the wrapping up on the book and the story. I think that was the most I've actually said about my story. The most detail I think I might have put into telling anybody my story, and not been like, all right, do I need to shorten this? Are they getting bored? Are they getting tired? So if you hit it incredibly well.
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, love it. I love hearing, that's the thing that I love about rugby in America is almost all of us came to the sport from a non-traditional path.
Right.
It's not like, where you started playing basketball when you were 7 or you started playing football when you were 8. It's everyone has this really unique journey. And I love seeing that. And I love hearing that. And I never get tired of hearing those stories of how people got into this really niche sport. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about this community.
Dude, and that you're exactly right. It's one of the parts that have always made it very interesting to me to maintain is because, like you said, those stories are unique. Each one, while their similarities are rarely ever the same. Which
Right.
I mean, you can say about many stories, but it feels differently because those same stories amplify the significance of what the sport ended up doing for them as a whole, and not just as an athlete or wannabe athlete or anything like that. It seems to always have this wild ripple effect that adjusted the direction of their lives.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's something about coming to a sport as a fully formed adult.
Right.
And doing something, and it's not just a sport, it's anytime you do something new as an adult, it has a different flavor than if you started it when you were a kid, right? If you go and take a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class now, that's going to be different than if you took a karate class when you were 11, right? It's just it's a different mentality. It impacts you differently, and it has a different weight to it.
True story. I agree fully. Well, before we start getting into this, I always like to say every superhero has their origin story, and it's what allows us to be able to set the basis of what is and what will be. So to get your superhero origin story, Adam, I have one question for you.
Yeah.
How did you get started with rugby?
Yeah, it was one of those roundabout, unusual stories, right? And in many ways, I've heard this story from a lot of other people as I've done this book, but I had moved to Virginia with a largely disintegrating marriage. We came down here to kind of get a new start from Ohio, where I had lived. The marriage didn't didn't last even with the move. And so I found myself 2 states away from home, not really knowing anyone, working at a bank during the day and bartending at night, and just kind of going through life, sort of zombieing through life. I was in my 30s, perpetually skinny, had always avoided things that were difficult or painful or unpleasant. That was kind of my MO going through life.
Right.
And I was bartending, and the local rugby club were regular guests of mine. And so I got to know them. I didn't even know you could play rugby in the U.S. I had seen it every once in a while on ESPN, and I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what the hell is going on, but this is interesting. But it was certainly nothing I had ever considered doing myself, right? It's about as likely as me skydiving. I wasn't going to do that. And
never say never, apparently.
I've learned that. Never say never. And so the guys came in, and we'd talk, and eventually they were like, well, why don't you come out? And I literally remember saying to them, have you seen me? Like, you're looking at me, right? And they're like, no. They gave that old rugby cliche line that we give new people, which is there's a position for everyone.
Yeah.
Right. Which I was certain was just, they wanted me to be cannon fodder. And I was certain of that.
You were like, look, you guys need practice dummies. Like,
exactly.
Is this what we're trying to do now?
That was what I envisioned. And so I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. And I went home, and I distinctly remember going home to this horrible, like, drafty apartment and going, you know what? Why not? Like, I've not been someone who's stuck with things. I've not been someone who takes risks. Screw it. Let's do it. And so I literally ordered the book Rugby for Dummies off Amazon that night because I knew nothing about the game. I read it before practice. I go to my first practice, didn't know what I was doing, overwhelmed, old, out of shape, and yet I absolutely fell in love with the community and the brotherhood of the sport, and kept going back. And next thing I know, I'm the club president and coaching, and still occasionally hobble my skinniness out there, but
get on the pitch. That's awesome. So wait, which club was it that brought you in?
It's Blackwater RFC in Lynchburg, Virginia. We're a D3 club, but just one of those run-of-the-mill American small town clubs. Just absolutely fell in love with the group of guys. I got married this past January, and all of my groomsmen, thank you. All of my groomsmen were teammates or former teammates. Guys who had been on that first team and then moved on, but they came back for the wedding. And so just that was really an example for me of the bonds and the community that drew me to this game. I tell people I fell in love with rugby because I fell in love with the people at the club. Yeah. It wasn't vice versa. I wasn't already in love with rugby and then found this club. I fell in love with the club, which led me to fall in love with rugby.
Dude, I love that. I kind of just want to backtrack a little bit. Obviously you said from Ohio and obviously came to Virginia starting afresh. Yeah. For you, were you not a sports person at all, or was your family one and it just was something that disassociated from you? Like, what was your relationship before the Virginia time?
I have always been a massive sports fan, massive, but much of my sports fandom was intellectual, right? So I grew up, I was a huge Cincinnati Reds baseball fan. And to this day, so I was 8 years old in 1990 when the Reds won the World Series out of nowhere. Hadn't won one since the 70s. Haven't won one since. To this day,
the 80s were such a hot time for Cincinnati sports.
Oh, I know. I mean, you had the Icky Shuffle in football, right? You had, Boomer Esiason.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you guys somehow, you guys angered somebody and then were just decided to be like cursed from then on.
ever since. But to this day, as a 40-year-old, I can recite the starting lineup of that 1990 Cincinnati Reds team.
Of course.
So I was always intellectual. Yeah.
Right.
And so I played basketball all my life growing up, ran track, those kind of things. Never a contact sport, but I was always a huge fan. Again, I was from Central Ohio, so Ohio State Buckeyes were in my blood. It was a birthright. It wasn't a choice. And so sports were always huge in my family and with myself, but just not always at the participational level.
Right. Again, which, you know what, to the element, that's a lot of where I think majority of sports come from, despite the fact of everybody having their high school sports story. For most part, it usually ends about that point and maybe doesn't even rise that much even there. Just there was a little bit of participation. We played soccer whenever we were kids, yada, yada, to that effect. And I know for the Midwest, I'm an Iowa guy, in my middle. So I understand a lot of the dynamics that come with that, again, a very contained element to how sports is done and participation is palatable at best.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So for you, with this always having in mind, was there after like high school, was it kind of just like no more sports and just kind of day in and day out as per usual? Or was there anything that you still like rec league stuff or anything like that beforehand?
I did a little bit of rec league basketball every once in a while, old man basketball at the YMCA, or, did some rec league soccer. I became a big soccer fan of the Columbus Crew in Major League Soccer. And so I had season tickets there and we do stuff with that. But again, a lot of it was still intellectual and recreational. And, outside of hitting the golf course a couple times a week, it was mostly just watching it in person or on TV and following it that way.
Word. So it's such kind of an interesting base because the way that you tell the stories is one that comes from a perspective, and I've only gotten to read excerpts from the book, but the one that you have kind of tells so much more of a story that feels first person almost. It feels you're there as opposed to it being like technical. Maybe technical is the wrong word, but more omnipotent. Over the top, so I get that even from the fandom. Whenever it's something that you're so already intrigued in, you already have that innate natural understanding of how to go about things.
Absolutely. And I view myself in this book as not just a storyteller, but I realized early on that I was becoming less the storyteller and more just the vehicle for other people to tell their stories.
Right.
Just sort of the repository of stories. And then I just became the conduit of other people's stories, because like we said, everyone has a story when it comes to their rugby journey in particular, because so few of us came up with it. And so, we all have those stories. And I think those stories are valuable, and I want to be the mouthpiece for those.
And I think that one is one that it's so important because it's easy to retell. And some of these are just not only just not necessary, but the nuance of them, and where we go back again to say there's so many similar stories, but that nuance is where the difference makes the biggest change for it.
Yep.
For you, was this obviously you this was a big endeavor its own, but had you already been a person that already liked writing stories, whether short stories or anything like that? Right. English major already by practice, no?
Yeah, and I have a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. And so most of my background has been in poetry. I've had, 4 collections of poetry published, and I've always said I have a poet's attention span where, it's limited. Like I can sit down and write a poem and 20 minutes later I'm done. I put it aside and I'm moving on to something else.
You're gone.
Yeah. So
had this moment and we're good now.
This was my first time really sitting down and doing something long form, book length. And I had thought about it for a couple years. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to keep thinking about this unless I start doing it. And so I sat down one night after a rugby practice and I pulled up Google and social media and just started making a list of all the rugby clubs in America that I could find. And I just started firing off emails, sending off instant messages, sending off DMs, and just was like, you know what? I'm gonna put myself in a corner here and make myself do this. Because once people started responding, I was like, all right, we're in this. You know, we're in. I got to do it.
I feel like that's one of the things that come when it comes to the that comes with the rugby community itself. Like it almost because it's very small, despite also being very large, but being very small, at least very intertwined. It feels that once you started eliciting responses back, and most of them are always going to be interested.
Oh yeah,
it's like, okay, I don't have a choice, because if you just drop this ball in here and then do nothing with it, like I feel like people start going like, what was going on here? Like, what do we have going on? What's going on? And it will ripple effect through the countryside of like, yo, there's some random guy just like
right. Exactly. Danny Barrett, I talked to him and he said that rugby is the biggest small community in the world.
Right.
You know, and once I realized that I would start talking to people and they'd be like, oh yeah, I've heard about what you're doing. And I'm like, see, that could go either way, you know,
right?
Like it worked out well. But if I had come off somewhere as a dick or as, you know, someone who was trying to get a scoop or, you know, make something look bad, that would have rippled too. And I wouldn't have gotten anywhere.
Yeah. And that's it's the interesting, I don't want to say catch-22, but the interesting dynamic of this phone tag community that we have at some points. I love it. So kind of like jumping back. So you started into rugby and if I get too deep, just tell me, hey, back up, and we don't have to answer. Don't worry. You know, this is what we do. We press a little bit.
That's right. I'm an open book.
But in this time period that you started playing rugby, when did it start? Was the marriage already dissolved at that point, or was it like kind of simultaneously?
No, that was over. I was living on my own. I was kind of trying to figure out what life was going to look like, and you know, sort of reassemble some identity. I hadn't been, you know, single in years and years and years, and I was like, you know, I don't really know what this looks like. I don't. She had friends down here. You know, she had lived down here previously, and so everyone we knew, she knew, and I didn't. So I didn't have really anyone outside of like the 4 or 5 people that worked with me at the bank, and then a couple of people that worked at the bar. You know, and so I was like, I'm a social person. I need something.
You need that communication aspect. Like there needs to be an outlet to be able to just transact information together.
100%. And I'm an only child, so like the concept of brotherhood has always resonated really, really deeply with me. And it's always been really difficult to find. And what I experienced in coming out to rugby from day one was, dude, these guys like are serious about community. And you know, it just, that's what got its hooks in me. Was the community and the brotherhood and the connection. I needed it in that moment, and it was there.
Nice. You know, I always find that interesting point wherever you see the intertwinement, not just of the camaraderie, but whenever you see the intertwinement of what happens with your club, and then how it connects into how you end up connecting with the opponents that you play with.
Yeah.
You know, I always say, and obviously you heard this, but, you know, whenever I first started, for me, there was always, I mean, there's your friends and your people, but because I didn't know rugby, I just knew sports. And especially with football, I knew contact sports. So it was just like, all right, you know, you at least try and get that job done. Yeah. And you work and you have fun and, you know, you can chill, but you're never really that super close. There's always a little bit of resistance. But like, as I got more and more engaged in, and then obviously when it came to dealing with your opponents,
Yeah.
you're just like, no, those are your opponents. Like
Those are the enemy.
You're cool up to the point. Like you can't be too cool with people that you're trying to smash.
Right.
And I think for the first like year and a half, that was my mindset until we start playing the same people over and over again, and then you're like, hey man, all right, let's talk this out. And then you start going on trips and tours, and you're like, yo, you guys are all right. You guys are dope.
And that's the weird thing is that happens organically. Like, yes, there's old boys who are around going, this is how we do things. Sure, that exists. But even without them, it, like you said, when you play the same guys over and over, and there's something about rugby that paradoxically encourages vulnerability. Right? We are a dog eat dog, smash mouth sport, and it is. But there's something about it where I know what it takes to step across the chalk line wearing a short sleeve shirt and short shorts and maybe a mouthpiece, and that's it. And being out there and vulnerable and exposed, and I know what that takes. And so anyone else who does that, whether they're on the other side or on my side, has my respect.
Word. And
in a way that I don't think we often articulate or even are conscious about, but we get this respect that carries over, especially like you said, when you see the same person 2-3 times a season, and then you begin to go, okay, all right, I like that dude. I like how he carries himself. I like that we can go at each other. I like, that
how we are at the social.
Yep, exactly. I know that if I knock him down, I'm helping him up, and if he knocks me down, he's helping me up. And there's just something that is incredibly special about that in this sport.
No, I love that. With that in mind, who was your first story that you picked up whenever you put it for the book?
So the first story, I think it was a guy named BT Shea out in Denver. He's with the Denver Barbarians. He's helped run their sevens program recently, and he started an organization called Rugby Rent Scholarships, where they are bringing people in to Denver. They bought a house that the scholarship recipients live in.
Nice. So like a frat house without it being a frat.
Exactly. They play for the Barbos, and then they have like 4 pillars to this program where they give them mentorship. They help them find career options. They help them obviously playing rugby, and then they get them involved in the community. And it's a really cool setup. And I remember he was the first person that I talked to on the phone for this project. I had done some emails and stuff, and he was the first phone conversation. And I remember him saying something and being like, can this part be off the record? And I had this moment of going, he asked me if this could be off the record. I'm a real journalist. Like this is crazy. Like that's something that you see in the movies. Like it was this moment where I was like, oh my gosh. Like he just like, I like had this little like out of body moment where I was like, this is it. I've arrived. I'm official. Things are off the record now. Like this is a thing.
I have made this. Yes. My label has been set.
It sounds so funny, but it's so true. I was like, and even after that, like over the year that I was doing this, if someone would say, I just still get this little thrill of like, being in this inner sanctum of like suddenly now being the guardian of secrets.
You have now become the gatekeeper.
That's right.
The repository of information, the library of knowledge.
That's right. It's all right here. Yeah. I love it. It was great. But that was sort of my first, okay, I'm doing this story and moment.
No. And I think that's real. Like, I'm always going to say, as I told you. All right. We're just going to preface that as right. Forever preface. As I told you. Yeah. But like, it always was that part of it when it came to, again, doing media stuff, where the vulnerability of people becomes more. It becomes weighted for you, not in a negative way, but it's like they're giving you a chance to obviously filter and distribute this information, but trust you with this information and how it gets handled. And you always wonder. I love how you said it was like it feels like it was in the movies, because I know for me it was always like that same feeling where you step in. And you see it in the movies, the people on the press boxes, or you get the dark corner conversation, or you're with your notepad and you're going through and just trying to type out or film out or edit this story. And for me, being able to tap in there, what always felt, and I always tell these people, what always felt like it was a distance, like irregardless, like if I hadn't done media, let's say to this day, I just simply was playing rugby and somebody told me, hey, let's talk to Danny Barrett or let's talk to Perry Baker. That would be like, yo, you've got ins. You have real ins to this. Like, irregardless of whatever you want to say rugby's at, it feels like it is a huge gateway. But entering into this, so many more people became accessible, like weirdly accessible. And then it just started making me question the accessibility of literally all the other systems of media that goes around.
Yeah. And I realized that early on, where I was speaking with someone and he was a well-connected rugby individual. And he's like, okay, how can I help? I'm like, I'm just trying to find people to talk to.
Yeah.
And, I had made a lot of inroads at the club level. And I was like, I want to get the high performance level too.
Right.
And he's like, okay, here's so-and-so's phone number. And this so-and-so would be, Dan Lyle or Alex Corbisiero. And he's like, here's so-and-so's phone number. Here's this, I'm like, I don't feel like I should have this information.
Right.
I feel,
am I ready for this?
I feel transgressive at this point. Like, is this okay? Like, he's like, yeah, they're expecting you. And I'm like, okay. And even then I would still send a text and I'd be like, is this so like, I don't know. But it was just, there's something of, and I think it's a rugby thing.
Yeah.
Just the level of, and the number of people who would say something and then go, don't put that in the book. And I'd be like, okay. But there was a trust there, like you mentioned, that, was really important to me, and something that I didn't take lightly, because I don't think that exists in a lot of other places. Especially in 2022 America, trust is a really rare commodity,
right?
Especially with people who you don't know,
right?
And so having that in this community was just something that really stuck with me and really blew me away, was the accessibility and the fact that people said, it didn't have anything to do with me. Right. It was like, we believe in what you're doing. We believe in this project and we want to support it. I just happened to be the one who picked up the ball and ran with it.
Right.
It could have been anyone. They would have responded the same way. And that's, I think, just so telling about the quality of the individuals and the nature of the sport.
Well, I will say this. I disagree with you that it could have been anybody, because I think, again, the reason why and that you're capable of doing it is because of the fact that you had the awareness of it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, and we've seen this even in or out of community, a person can be able to have the access, but not have the emotional intelligence of what it means to do that. And even more so, can lack the objectivity to be able to discern between vulnerability and not necessarily just offense, but vulnerability and a position that might not make the most directional sense for it. So understanding and discerning that comes off, one, your initial states are set that up, but then you create a vibe of sort for people to be able to open up to it. Like, I know whenever I talk to you about it, I was just like, I don't really care what happens. Like, yo, say whatever it is, even if it's to me at this point. But I know if somebody, and I think again maybe it helps again the awareness where it's like I know if somebody's coming and asking this, and you're putting something like this together. I understood the effort that it took. And so it was like, yo, take whatever it is that you need with the information, because for whatever it is that's going to be done, you are going to end up having to deal with whether how it works or doesn't work. And you're putting yourself as a pinpointed target, and having that emotional understanding to understand that there's a win, there could be big wins or there could be big losses, all depending on how you display that information out. And sounds like it's been so far a pretty big win in
I
all
think so. I think it helped. I think it's worth mentioning. I think it helped that I have always and continue to view myself as really just a nobody in the rugby community. You know, I mean, I played for 5-6 years at a D3 club in the middle of Virginia. You know, I played below average scrum half, and you know that was my rugby resume in its totality. And so I didn't come into this with an agenda of greatness, with a, you know, I'm this and I'm this and I'm this and I've done this, because I haven't. And so, you know, I think that was something that I continue to carry with me. And, you know, I think that it helps because, you know, I'm not there to swap stories with someone who's played for 20 years. I'm there to listen. I'm there to tell their story, because my story, it's significant in that we all have a story.
Word.
And I tell the story in the book because I think it's important to ground where I'm coming from. If you're going to be reading my words, I think it's important that you know how I came to this. But at the end of the day, I'm the least important person in that book. Like it's all of these stories that make the game what it is. And I think that has gone a long way to, you know, I'm not competing with anybody in this book. I'm not competing with anyone I spoke to.
Right.
I want to get out of the way and let them be the star of their story.
No, I love that. I love that. You know, as you're doing this, you get so many, like we said, we get so many different stories. But I think there's a difference between getting so many rugby stories and getting so many stories that happen to have rugby.
Yep.
For you, in a situation, I love to speak to the cultural elements, because one of the biggest aspects of rugby is the fact that it has a massive range on cultural dissonance between each other. And one thing when it comes to U.S. rugby especially has been the fight of trying to find identity in rugby. I find an identity that's specific to the U.S. that works through rugby, as opposed to maybe a amalgamation of somebody else's rugby from around the country. But of course, that also plays because the U.S. is an amalgamation of different cultures.
100%.
For you, in your opinion, what was one story that you can, you know, privy us to that you felt was culturally deeper than you expected it to be, and also resonated in a way that simultaneously the way that it resonated for that person definitely changed, maybe adjusted the way that you saw rugby, or reconfirmed that depth that you understood from rugby?
Yeah. I'll give you a couple. And to preface it, like, I realized about midway through that I was approaching this not as a sports writer. I was approaching this as almost an anthropologist. And looking at, because I'm also a big culture guy, and I want to know this. I made very clear early on, this was not going to be a book of who won what and who played in this and who won this championship and what league did this. I couldn't care less. I mean, I love that stuff, but that's not what the book's about. Not what the book's about. It's not the heart of the book. The heart of the book is the cultures and the stuff that, as you said, you know, rugby's a part of the story, but it's not the whole story. And so a couple of those that really resonated for me, one was I talked to a guy named Mark Burke, who was out of Washington, D.C. And Mark is profoundly deaf and started playing rugby with Frederick RFC up in Maryland, as he and a friend were the only deaf individuals on the team. And that really resonated. I'm deaf in one ear. And I notice when I play, because I'm deaf in one ear, I can't tell where sound is coming from.
Yeah.
My depth perception doesn't work. And so if someone's on my right or my left, if they say my name, I don't know where they are. And so I know that's difficult, but I know that pales in comparison to being profoundly deaf.
Right.
And so I talked to Mark, and Mark had, in the early 2000s, founded a team called All Deaf RFC, which was an all deaf rugby club in Washington, D.C. And that whole experience and that whole identity was fascinating to me, of how you take what most would see as a hindrance or a disability and you change it around into a context like rugby, and the adaptations that are required, but the perseverance that's required, and more than that, the success that they see. And in a similar vein, I talked to a guy from the Pittsburgh Steel Wheelers, who are a wheelchair rugby club. And I remember asking him, I said, what do most people get wrong when they talk about wheelchair rugby? And he said 2 words: inspiration porn. He said, that's what we call it. Inspiration porn. He's like, we are not an inspiration. We play rugby just like everybody else. We are not an inspiration. We are out here to play and compete and do everything that you do, only we're in a wheelchair.
Right.
And that really changed how I viewed all those things. That statement.
Yeah. And that is actually, that makes sense. And again, something that I think unconsciously we set aside, like even saying it out loud, it's like, no, you just guys, you're not out here trying to be like, I have a rough. If I can do it, you can do it too. Be better. But it's like, no, we just happen to play. Like, just our presentation of it has to be done differently.
Yeah. And as soon as he said that, I had to mentally rewrite what I was planning on writing, like in that moment, because I was 100% going to take the inspiration angle, because that's what
we always do.
That's what sports writers do. That's what you do. Like that's natural in how we view that. And so I had to take a second and go, okay, let's change that. Because his point was, when people do that, it's to make themselves feel better. It's not to make us feel better. Right. And I was like, good point. I recognized, like that was totally the angle I was going to take. And I even wrote about that in that section where I was like, this is what he said, and he was right. And so I'm not going to end it this way. This music's not going to swell. I'm going to end it with their ruggers. That's it. That's all that's important. And it was a real eye opener for me. And then the one other one that I want to share, and I've shared in other interviews, it's sort of my go-to that really changed my worldview and how I approached this book, was Tamaris Montano, who is a Navajo woman in Gallup, New Mexico, who started a youth rugby organization on the edge of the Navajo reservation in Gallup, New Mexico, with no money. Kids who had never heard of rugby were living in poverty, with alcoholism, with domestic violence, with gangs. She was traveling an hour and a half to play teams in Albuquerque who had been around for decades and just getting waxed. And her story didn't go the way I anticipated it going. I was expecting that, she built this program. It is going gangbusters and doing great things. And the reality is the program did really well against a lot of adversity. And then it kind of fell apart. And she got really emotional in sharing that story. And what ended up happening is some of the alumni from the program came back and ended up founding a select squad called the Indigenous Warriors. And they played a one-off against a team of Indigenous peoples from Australia in Gallup, New Mexico. They played a one-off game that became a two-off game, and then they played more, and they've now played in Mexico. They've played against First Nations peoples in Canada. They played against a team of Iroquois in New York. And it's just been this hugely successful thing of the Indigenous Warriors that Tamaris now is coaching. She has been a recipient of the Premiership Scholarship to go study in England, and just her joy is infectious, but her story was not linear, and it wasn't all joy, and it wasn't all success, and it was real. And she was one of my absolute favorite people to talk to for this, and the emotion was there, and the passion was there, and the cultural differences were there. She started all of our chats together with a welcome in Navajo. She ended it with a blessing and a prayer in Navajo, and it gave me goosebumps every time. So it was one of those things where it was so much bigger than rugby and so much more than a sport. And one of my absolute favorite and emblematic things about this whole process and journey was talking with her.
And that feeling of seeing it bigger in the sport is the one that I think caught me always the most when doing it. I always talk about my Singapore to Tokyo journey. Yep. And while the process and the rugby and everything was great, it was knowing the impact that it does. Because, and I think I always wonder, I've thought about this for a long time, trying to figure out, why does this one hit so different versus, for me, other sports? Because it's not the first time we hear inspirational stories. Of course not. Yeah. American football, baseball, Field of Dreams.
Right. Absolutely. My favorite movie of all time. Yeah.
Exactly. Arguable. See, again, the Midwest is coming out.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm telling you. I'll interject this. Every opening day of baseball season, I have a ritual. Since I was a kid, I watch Field of Dreams. I cry at the same two spots every single year, and I eat a meatball sub. It's ritual doesn't have to make sense, Gift. It doesn't have to make sense.
It doesn't have to, but it as long as it hits and impacts exactly the same way that it's supposed to each time.
Yep.
And see, and that's my point. Like we have it, but for some reason, when it comes to this sport, and maybe because of the fact that it is a small, big sport, that you want to make sure that there's something else than just my personal desire, or there's a realization of my personal desire, because you work in it, you play, but there's not really much of what you would consider as a direct reward that comes from it outside of your what it is you feel. So what it is you feel ends up being the highest currency of this. But knowing that there was something else bigger than that, whether it's Singapore to Tokyo or stories like MICR or ISF or
I was going to mention them. Avery Watts out at South LA Soul.
Right. Exactly. You're like, okay, this. I guess blasphemously saying it becomes almost a little bit of a religious experience.
Yeah. I say in the book, there's an element of the cult to rugby. Yeah. We are always evangelizing, right? We're always looking for someone to come join us.
Yeah.
Guys, we're outside of shopping malls. Like, come join us. Yeah. We're like the Hare Krishnas in the airport. Come on. You look like you play rugby. Come on. We all have that, and it comes with it. And there's something about it where once it gets its hooks in you, there is this element of the church, in it. And I was a pastor for 7 years. I understand the pull of these things, the pull of community. It doesn't always matter what is behind that community. Sometimes community is the thing that you're selling. Right. And I think with rugby, the way we get 75% of our new recruits is the community. Yeah, there's some who they want the athletic challenge and they don't play football anymore and they want the next thing. Sure, there's always going to be those. But I think the majority are guys like me who just they fit the community, and women who come along and they find that community there, guys who come along and they find that community there. And I think that, there's that, you're right. It's almost a spiritual experience. And I hate to over mystify again, right? But there is some of that, unmistakably.
Agreed. What was the process of selecting the people that you found? Obviously, you spoke a little bit about having people recommended, but for you, what was the initial? Because finding the clubs and shooting it out, that's an everyday, because you never know what clubs are going to be, but within every club, there's going to be at least 10, 12, 14, 20, 50 different stories involved in each one. What was your process in being able to select the stories that you wanted to use for the books versus the ones that you were like, yeah, maybe not for this one?
Yeah. It was tough. It was really tough. I ended up speaking with a little over 500 clubs, individuals, and organizations in the research for this book. I have 9 yellow legal pads, full-size, full of notes, plus just threads of Facebook messages, emails, Instagram DMs. I mean, just volume after volume of information. And I hit a point in the book writing where I got completely overwhelmed.
The paralysis by analysis kind of
thing. I was
thing.
having trouble going, how am I going to organize and present this information in a way that makes sense?
Yeah.
And isn't just, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story. There's got to be a narrative thread here. There's got to be some way to organize all of this data. And I actually went probably a month and a half doing nothing with it. I was just overwhelmed. I just couldn't find my way in. And I thought I had a way in, and it was bogging down, and I just got really overwhelmed and discouraged and put it aside. And then one night, it was like, again, one of these overly mystical things. It was like one night in the middle of the night, I woke up and it was like fully formed in my head. And I had to get up out of bed and come out to my computer and like write it all down before I forgot.
Get it out before it disappears.
Yes. And so it ended up being organized by region as sort of like a rugby road trip.
Yeah.
But, I still, as I went through, I talked to clubs, I talked to individuals, and I would hear little bits of stories and go, oh, I want to follow up on that. And so I'd follow up on these wild hares. And there were a couple like white whales, like people that I wanted so badly to talk to. And I would have trouble getting them. So one was Nate Ebner. Nate Ebner, 7-star Super Bowl champion, Ohio State Buckeye. Okay.
Yep.
He was like,
that's like the premier, like right there. It's all markers.
He was there. And eventually I was able to connect with him. He was the coolest guy, great conversation, but he was one of those I was like, okay, while I'm having these other conversations, I'm still tracking him down.
Yeah.
There was a club called Boston Maccabee, which is an all Jewish club in Boston. Yeah. And they had caught my eye early on. I had found a social media posting at sort of the height of the Trump Muslim ban, where they had posted about a picture of one of their wingers scoring a try and being hugged. That winger was a Muslim from Morocco, and on this Jewish identity club, which was a fascinating story. And I'm like, I want to follow up on this. And it was one of those where, for whatever reason, it was incredibly difficult to make the connection. I mean, I was going through every back channel I could find and just could not open the door until about 3 weeks before I called the book quits. I finally got a hold of the founder. We had an amazing hour and a half conversation. That's awesome. And it came together at the end. So there was always those stories that I absolutely wanted more than anything else to have in there. And then the rest were just pleasant surprises. And then there were some where they were just absolutely phenomenal people, but they didn't have the hook that I was looking for, or they had a hook that I already had. And so they were great people, great men and women who I still have great relationships with, but I had to tell them later on, it didn't make it in. And I'm hoping to write another one or keep going with the podcast, and we're going to get your story out there, but it's not in there. And I hated that. It was one of the worst parts of the book, was not being able to get everyone in there, because everyone does have a great story. You know, that's the thing about it. The book would have been 3,000 pages long writing it,
You didn't want to take a note from the book of Tolkien or a C.S. Lewis?
No, I did not.
Novelize?
Yeah, I did not want. Okay, this is volume 17, and I'd have 4 people who might read it. I didn't want to do that. Yeah.
No, I love it. Especially when you hear all these stories. I know for me, there you kind of start seeing a lot of similarities that go whether regionally or not. And when it comes to like how you saw the U.S. rugby, what was an aspect that you kept seeing reoccurring, whether subtly or very direct, that made you go like, oh, this might be one of these bottlenecks that might be impacting the development of U.S. rugby in the USA, and it's something that we really need to pinpoint, but it seems to be missed over and over again.
So as kind of a weird answer to that, I think the single problem that I kept seeing over and over is silver bulletism, where so many people with good intentions and great minds say, this is the answer. This is the answer to the problem. And the reality is, the problem that America faces when it comes to rugby is so big because America is so big, right? We're vast. We're diverse. These are all the things that make America great. There are also things that make building a niche sport incredibly difficult. The geographic scale, the cultural diversity, those great strengths are also huge obstacles. And so what I realized, in doing this, is there are a lot of very well-meaning, very intelligent people who are dead set on their solution. And everyone else's solution is obviously inferior. And what I realized is we have to take a both and or an all and approach. Like, our problem is too big for one solution. And so there's so many people who are like, MLR is bad for USA rugby, right? It brings in too many foreign players. It's bad. Other people are like, it's great for American rugby because it gets eyeballs. It gets awareness. It gives young players an opportunity. I heard people say academies are killing the American rugby game. I had others who say academies are the best thing for the rugby game. I had others who say colleges are where it's at. You don't need academies. We have universities. I had others, and all of these answers,
just contradictions.
And none of them are wrong. That's the thing. They are contradictory, but they're also complementary. If we look at it that way. The reality is all of those things have to work together if American rugby is going to do anything. Because we can't take one approach. If we take one approach and say, we put all of our eggs in this basket, we are missing 80% of the other eggs. And it's never going to be good enough because this country is so vast, because we're starting from such a deficit where the cream of the crop of our players are starting as 18, 20, 24-year-olds. And so we're already at a deficit. We can't afford to say, this is the way. This is the path. There has to be multiple paths. And what that unfortunately requires is a lot of people saying, you do you, and I'll do me. And we'll
find ourselves in the middle
yes,
somewhere.
Yes.
Here.
And that is not something that comes easily to human nature. And
let alone Americans.
Right. And especially Americans, and especially the kind of Americans who run a sport like rugby.
Yeah.
It's a type A sport.
Yeah.
And when you get 500 type A personalities trying to accomplish something, you're going to get 500 ways of doing it. And one right way and 499 wrong ways. And that's one thing that is crippling us.
Yeah.
Is, we've got this mentality that there is a way that's going to fix what ails American rugby.
Right.
Instead of looking at and saying, how can I do, I love what the American Raptors are doing. And the thing that I really love about them was when I first reached out to Peter Pask, the general manager of the American Raptors, I said, I don't want to give away any trade secrets, but this is just for my own interest. How do you guys do this? And he's like, no. He said, there are no trade secrets. We want other people to hear this. We want other people to do this or go along with this or adapt it. And it's the idea that the American Raptors said, okay, we're going to do this lane.
Yeah.
We're not going to tell anybody else how to do their lane. They can do their lane. We're going to do this one and do it well and take this niche and fill it up, right? We're going to work on the crossover athletes.
Right.
They're not saying it's the only
Don't
way.
do this.
No, they're not saying everyone has to do this.
This is our part of the game.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if we had more people saying, I'm going to do this and do it well, and I'm not going to tell somebody else how to do their lane. I'm going to do my lane and do it well. They can do their lane and do it well, and it's going to ultimately serve more people in more ways and better the game. And I think it's something that hopefully we will see more of. I think the advent of the World Cup in 2031 and 2033 will help. But I think initially it has hurt because we've got that instant urgency,
right?
Where now we're like, the roof's on fire, it's coming in 10 years, we got to go. And so that urgency has created even more, it has to be this way.
Right.
Because we don't have time now to debate. We don't have time to do multiple things. We have to do this now. And it's sort of amped up the pressure. And pressure can produce diamonds, but it can also
create volcanoes.
Exactly. I'm still optimistic, but I'm an eternal optimist. I believe that there's enough brilliant people in American rugby at all levels that we can figure out how to take all of these lanes at once and create great things. It's what America does.
I think that's one, and I love that you put it that way because it's one aspect that I know for me, even personally, I've wrestled with a lot, trying to be like, because again, for me, a media person, I'm always like, be in front, public, bring people in, public, talk. But I've also had come as you start to speak with more people and kind of read dynamics and learn from others that it's not always just that. Like you said, it's not a one thing effort. And it's not even a 2 or 3 thing effort, but it is absolutely a maintain your lane. I'm not going to even say stay in your lane because I think that comes off aggressive. Maintain your lane. If you have a focus, you need to make sure that you can perform that job the best, which ironically is the most rugby thing that we could ask for in this.
Yep. Yeah. If you're the fullback, be the fullback. Don't try to carry the ball every time. Be smart. If you're the scrum half, don't get in every ruck. You know,
exactly.
If you're the prop, maybe don't kick as much. You know,
right.
Know your role.
Know your role.
Be ready to do anything. That's the beauty of rugby, right?
Yes.
Be ready to do anything if asked, but make sure you do your role and do it well.
No, and that one hits. I think that if any lesson comes from this is for me, that one is the one that sticks out the most because of the fact that it stands to create what I've always believed and hoped to occur is the rugby ecosystem. Yeah. Because ecosystem means that every organism has to have a purpose, and that purpose serves to survive the rest of the other organisms. Yep. But like you said, it's been an identifier, though I do feel that in this time period that we have now, I think has been probably the most prominent time to be able to pull that off, because I think every time before that, rugby just did not have either the distribution, the knowledge, the openness to be able to create that system that is
the democracy.
That democracy.
There wasn't a rugby democracy for a long time. There was, to put it respectfully, a bunch of old white dudes in a room, calling the shots. Literally, a bunch of old white dudes, and some of those old white dudes are great dudes. Yeah, right. They're good guys.
They're well-meaning, good guys. But
when people of color, when gay and trans athletes, when women, when they didn't have seats at the table, you weren't going to get a diversity of solutions to a diversity of problems until you get a diversity of voices. Exactly. And I think we're beginning to see that. And I talked to Jeremy Treese, who's the head of NCR, who one of the things that he said that really resonated with me was talking about how we need people who are going to set a vision for what rugby can be, because America has always been a country that gets behind a big goal.
Yeah.
Right? World War II, we have to do this. Okay, people mobilized. Let's get to the moon. Okay, people mobilized. Huge goal, huge target, people rally, and they make it happen. And I think, that really resonated with me of someone saying, this is the challenge. We're all going to fill our niche, our lane, our role, and we're going to come together and make this happen. Mm-hmm. We've got 10 years to be a World Cup. Let's make it happen. Not just to put on an event, because we know America can do that.
Exactly.
Right? We put on events. You just put on events. You know that.
Right.
But, let's set an audacious goal of winning the thing. And then people begin to say, okay, let's do the impossible.
No, that's fact. One got me wanting to go run through a wall right now for you.
That
is facts. And when we're done, so much work is going to get done. But even more so, but to your point, I think that's always it. One of the biggest concepts of America, USA, is about how can we exaggerate the exaggerated? Yep. How can we blow this up and make it? Why I always will say the USA might not be the greatest country in the world, but I think it is the greatest marketing country in the world.
100%.
There's
a reason a lot of countries don't like us. It's because we do the audacious and we do it audaciously.
Exactly. Take it positive or negative.
Exactly.
It is very factually true that we will go over top for stuff. And I think that even speaks more to that identity. And I think that even creates to that element of what is the identity of rugby in the U.S., where we keep trying to find it in just a play, but it's not a play. It's not going to be in our coaching. It's not going to be it's going to be in a personality, in an aspect. It's going to be how we approach it as opposed to the way we approach or what's the technique of our approach. The technique might be the same as everything else.
Yeah. And we talked about that when you and I talked last time was, you had that realization that musically, the music that accompanied rugby was typically white European Celtic music, right? And you wanted to kind of Americanize the music and the presentation around rugby. I don't think I'm putting words in your mouth.
No, you're saying it right. And I'm actually just really impressed that it was remembered. And I'm just like feeling good. So I'm not good with compliments. So like right now, I'm just like trying to keep it inside and not, be.
Of course. Yeah. And I loved that because I heard that from other clubs, especially new clubs, saying we wanted to Americanize rugby, right? There's a club in Ocala, Florida, called the Ocala Gladiators. And one of the things that they said was, I hear myself echoing. I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear that.
Oh, no, that might be me. No worries. You're not coming through on my side, so it's all good.
Good deal. But they said, we wanted to Americanize rugby. We want to bring in cheerleaders. We have guys on our team who do, DJing. And so we put up EDM shows and we did all these things. And I love that.
That's awesome.
Or clubs like the South LA Soul, who are like, we want to be true to who our community is. And we don't always see ourselves represented and what roots rugby does. And, those things that really make rugby represent what the different communities in America are. And seeing that and seeing the things that you did and seeing the things that some of these clubs are doing, it really speaks to the fact that American rugby is and can come into its own.
Yeah.
As not, we're not going to be New Zealand.
Right.
We're not going to be England. I believe that in time we can compete with those countries. Right. But we're not going to compete with them by being them.
Right.
Because we're not them. Culturally, we're not them. Politically, we're not them. Socially, we're not them demographically. And we're not going to be. And so whatever solution we come up with, it has to be a solution that is American.
Right.
And not a solution that is
a replication
or Australian. Yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be authentically American, and that's going to look different than what rugby has looked like in America since the 60s.
Right. I mean, and to see that, and that's again, to see that resonance occurring now is a real privilege to be able to watch, even though it has a lot of work to do.
Yep.
But I think the other thing, and you said it again, but I feel like it needs to be repointed. Needs to be said again for people, is that the identity of rugby in America, or the identity of America, will not be tabulated as a single process.
No.
It's going to be, it's a prism effect, basically. Yep. It's going to be this rainbow effect that appears like it's going to be a single rugby beam that culturates, but in reality, it is literally everything kind of amalgamating itself into each other to tie itself in and then show itself out. And how that presents on the field and off the field is going to be different. But one thing I will say will always be fun is to piss off enough people internationally, especially the rugby purists from England and whatnot, that go, ooh, these Americans are trying to be all rugby. They don't know anything. Why are you saying it like this? And I say, yes. If we have not pissed off anybody, we have not done our job right.
I concur. I talked to Marcus Satavu from the Hartford Harpooners.
Yep.
And I loved talking to Marcus. He was one of my favorite people to talk to. He's been he did sevens. He did rugby league for the national team. He's been just incredibly successful in business and in rugby. He's one of my favorite people to talk to. But he said, I want to bring that brash Americanness to rugby. And understanding, as he said, not everyone's going to like that, even within the U.S. And that's okay, just like what we talked about.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be one size fits all.
Exactly.
Be who we are, because that's who America is. We're not one size fits all in any area of life in the United States.
Absolutely.
And we're not going to be in rugby either. And so embrace that diversity, embrace that, shared goal, but diversity of achieving it. Embrace that, go with it. And that's how we're going to see, I think, great things happen in American rugby, and how we're already seeing great things happen in American rugby.
No, 100%. Adam, I can't tell you how much I liked, and without consciously realizing it, needed to have this conversation. Big time. Where can people find your book, and then where can people also find you?
Yeah, so the book is called This Is Rugby. It is right here. It is on Amazon under This Is Rugby. You can get it on there. We're working on getting it into secondary retailers, but right now it's on Amazon. You can get it on there. I think it's a really fun read. I think you get a really broad scope of what American rugby looks like: men's, women's, IGR, military, all kinds of rugby, professional, grassroots, youth, college. There's a story in there for everyone. I hope you enjoy it. I'm on Instagram at Onward Rugby, and then I also have a podcast that is called Late to the Breakdown that you have been on. That has been on
I have?
You have, yeah. Yes, you have been on that.
Okay, nice. We'll go with it. Look, this is what I...
Have you been? No, you have not been on it. You've been in the book. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was about to be like. There's a whole memory that I just did not remember. I'm like,
you
okay.
have not.
I'm getting older,
confused.
so I was like, "Hey, my memory's
Look,
so I need to be on the podcast next."
You need to be on the podcast next. I have talked to a lot of people, and I get confused. I'm 40 and failing, So, but I do have a podcast called Late to the Breakdown, where I have interviewed a lot of the people who I've had on the book. There's been a brief hiatus while I focused on getting across the finish line with the book.
Wise.
We will be firing that back up. And you will be a guest on there.
Let's go.
We will, continue to put out content there because, the book is static. The book is out. It is done, but the stories continue to happen. And so I want to continue having an avenue to share those stories and allow people to share theirs and be a part of that conversation.
No, I love that. I love it, man. Adam, we're going to do this again because, as always, there's always something to add into it later on and to be able to see as the updates go and what more gets learned. But until that moment, I truly appreciated this. I think this was – I am so happy that you took this mission on and that you need to know that you've done something that is historically set for the rest of the time. And it is – if anything is left and this is your legacy, you've topped a lot of stuff. Obviously, I think you're going to continue on and do more, but just know it's well worth it, and we're appreciative and so much more.
Thank you so much for having me on. Big fan of the show. Big fan of what you're doing. Love it. Continue to support it, and I really appreciate it.
Yo, Adam, thank you so much for coming on, guys. I hope you guys get a chance to read the book. Absolutely get yours in today. And on top of that, while you guys are waiting, definitely check out some of our other episodes. Talked with Catherine Aversanu last week, one of the partners for the HBCU Rugby Classic, and of course, head coach for Howard University Rugby. We had Cassette Shiringanji, founder of Kiro Sports, one of the major rugby sports promoters in the U.S. and Zimbabwe. We had Takunda Rusiki, captain for the Howard women's rugby team. And we've had so many great guests over the last 2 years. 71 episodes today. Guys, we're making some headway, and I'm so proud of you guys. But most importantly, I hope that you guys know that I hope that you're happy. I hope that you're healthy. And of course, most importantly, I hope that you know that you are highly favored. Until next time, cheers.